Just to remind you. She has campaigns to go first, because she has meeting.
Good morning. Today is Friday, March 22nd, 2024. This is the meeting Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and we're resuming our work on Bill S-311. And our first guest this morning is, she was on the screen.
And she's left.
Well, I was about to say Kathy Byer.
Oh,
And
here she is. She's back. Yeah.
reconnecting.
Yeah.
Please hold.
Okay, she's there.
Great. Good morning, Ms. Byer. You're our first guest of the day.
Good morning, and I apologize. I had a little
Okay.
hopefully
Used to the occasional hiccup.
looks like my video is not working. Is that right?
It is not.
See if I can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Do you have a PowerPoint or anything we need to see?
I do not. And I will not sure I'm gonna be able to fix my camera,
All right, well,
but if you don't mind, I'll just I guess speak without you having to see my face. Does that work?
we can hear you loud and clear, so.
Okay, all right.
Monitor, you should, do you have something over your camera closing you off?
No,
Thank you. Hello, good morning.
there you are.
That's someone else used my computer and I didn't realize they had, yeah, well, that's better. Good morning. I'm Kathy Byer. I am Senior Vice President for Real Estate Development at Evernorth. I think a lot of you are familiar with me. And with our local partners around the state, we have 190 apartments under construction and over 430 in pre-development. And that robust pipeline is really possible due to significant investment by this legislature over the past 3 years in affordable housing. I was also a member of the NRB steering committee, and I support the recommendation of that report. In regards to S-311, I wanted to talk about why Act 250 exemptions, why exemptions for housing from Act 250 can facilitate more housing production. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about permit risk and real estate development. The best way to describe real estate development is the balancing of risks with the expenditure of pre-development spending. So when a developer is working on a potential parcel for housing, the value of that land is not vested until the local permit is in hand. Therefore, the developer is laser focused on getting that local permit and getting to an appeal-free status before spending significant time and resources to advance the project. In some communities, with a very robust zoning ordinance and technical review process by the municipal departments, obtaining that local permit can be at least a year long, going through sketch review, preliminary plat, and final plat. So we often don't talk about this balancing of risk and speed at which a developer can advance a project, but it's really one of the reasons why eliminating permit redundancy can help build more housing faster, and why I'm supportive of the Act 250 exemption in designated Tier 1 areas. In terms of cost, once you have that local permit in hand, then the next significant investment really is the Act 250 application. And I know it's it's not the application itself for Act 250 may not be that expensive to undertake, but to get your Act 250 permit, you need to have all your underlying state permits. And that means your stormwater permit, your water wastewater permit, you might have a wetlands permit. And that's where the significant investment starts in building housing, is paying a civil engineer to advance drawings that are adequate to get the underlying state permits, because the Act 250 permit can't be issued until those state permits have been issued. We also know that we pay a fee at the time of submitting the application, and that fee is not refundable, and it's based on your construction costs. Given the rapid increase in construction costs, we are seeing Act 250 fees that are nearing $2,000 a unit. So you don't start, it's to start the Act 250 application process. It's not something you do lightly, and you know that when you get to the end, you will have made a pretty considerable investment, not only in time, but in money. And then it also means that you have extended the appeal period, right? Because you've gone and got your local permit, hopefully get past the 30-day appeal period on the local permit. And then you start the Act 250 process, which because you can't get the Act 250 permit until those state permits are in hand, you really extend the possibility of an appeal for 6 to 9 months. And in my world, we really need to get past that appeal phase before we would want to make another significant investment in construction drawings. So if we can define appropriate areas for Act 250 exemptions for housing, where there is robust zoning and infrastructure in place, I do believe it can accelerate getting a project to construction. That was kind of the main thrust of what I wanted to talk about today, and it not get into the details of S311. And as I said, I was a member of the NRB steering committee and support the recommendations of that report.
Thank you. Can I ask for just a clarification? Well, so I get it. You're always managing risk, vulnerability to an appeal, and no one has ever spoken in this room or anywhere that I'm aware of about the value of duplicative permitting. So, because the extent that we can reduce or eliminate that, I think my sense is you have a lot of agreement. The question I'm wondering about is it always the case, and I'm a developer, so I don't know this, do you always start with municipal permits before you go to Act 250? Do you ever start with Act 250 and then come to municipal permitting second? And if not, can you explain just sort of the practical reason that happens?
Yep. Yeah, no, we never go to Act 250 first, and I'm not even sure that the district coordinator would. I think they rely on the local permit for evidence of compliance with the local zoning, and then also it's just in terms of spending money. It's usually you spend usually not in town communities, like not in some of the larger communities, you spend a lot of money getting that local permit, but usually you spend less money getting that local permit. And if you don't have a local permit, you got nothing, right? Your land is worth, you've got to vest in the local permit. And so that's always the first step.
Sure. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Are there any local permits that when you get to the Act 250 process, you think ought to satisfy an Act 250 criteria, but are currently not treated that way?
That's a good question. And caught me a little flat-footed. I'm not, might be better question to ask one of the regional planning commissions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have weeks of work ahead of us. So if you could consider that, I mean, that is one of those things where we talk about duplicative permitting is, I hear that term a lot, and I'm trying to actually get to the details of what people regard as duplicative permitting, and it's been a little hard to pin down. So I'm not trying to surprise you, ask a tough question. I'm just at you, since you're an experienced developer, if you can think about that
Sure.
was helpful to the committee. I mean, to me, it's sort of a give credit where credit is due.
Yep.
If a process that's regarded as adequately robust has delivered a permit, then I don't know why that permit shouldn't be valued elsewhere by the overall review system. Then under the Act 250 side of things, when you're saying, well, once you're in 250, you can't complete until you have all your state permits. Frankly, to me, again, I'm not a developer, that makes sense to me that you wouldn't get the final go-ahead build until all the required state permits that are not part of Act 250 itself have been satisfied. So am I failing to appreciate something from your perspective about the necessity to have those permits in hand before commencing construction?
No, not at all. We couldn't, our banks wouldn't let us start construction without having those in hand. The issue is, that quite frankly, the issue is the risk of appeal. And I've never seen anybody appeal a state water wastewater permit. I have seen people appeal our Act 250 permit. So it just extends that timeline. And I think many of you are aware of our project in Putney, which is now in its 3rd year of going through an appeal battle. And in that case, it was the jurisdictional opinion that was appealed. So the project qualifies as a priority housing project, and the appellant basically said they don't agree that it qualifies as a priority housing project.
Okay.
And so here we are.
Yeah, so that is, it's those sorts of well, I'll just say the first term that comes to mind, horror stories that sometimes come up as representative of your general experience in Act 250. And I think my understanding is that statistically they're quite rare, but they're disturbing to people. And so, I think what we're looking to make, we're interested in improvements. We don't want to be overly responsive to rare situations that don't generally apply.
I appreciate that, but if you put yourselves in the shoes of a developer who's writing tens of thousands of dollars of checks to architects and engineers and knows that they're still at risk for a permit appeal, it slows down the pace. In order to build a project, you need to invest in construction drawings, and that's a pretty large investment, and you don't do it until you get past that appeal period. And so I think there's no question that it adds 6 to 9 months of being able to get to the construction.
Well, and so I think I misspoke a little. I don't want to sound in any way like I'm saying, I think overly responsive. I think the misspeaking part is I'd like to be responsive, but accurately and strategically, not painting with such a broad brush that we have unintended consequences. Okay. It sounds like the last question, then we go to Senator Watson, is so it sounds like because appeals add uncertainty, so that delays investment. And it sounds like you have 3 rounds of vulnerability to appeal. There's the municipal permit, there's a state permit, and there's Act 250 permits. Am I missing any of the vulnerability windows that you face?
No, that's accurate.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Senator Watson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One of the things that I feel like I'm learning this time around through this process is just more about the state permits that are involved, and so in the case of the exemptions, like the Act 250, if Act 250 itself is not an enforcement mechanism, and if we're relying on other tools, then how would people go through the local process for sure? Is there how is one to know if you, let's say, need to get a wetlands permit, for example, or some of these other permits? I mean, Act 250 is like check all these boxes, do all these things. without that, what would be the tool to like get someone to go through these state processes?
Yeah, so A&R has a very good permit navigator. It's now online. So if any developer is going to know that they likely need some state permit, and the permit navigator takes you through that. Quite frankly, if you try to avoid it, you're probably gonna be caught somewhere along the way. And in our case, the financing requires a permit opinion before we start construction, and that's where it would come up if you couldn't. If you didn't go get your water wastewater permit, you might build your building, but you wouldn't be able to connect it to the water and sewer system, which would be bad.
Yes. Just to follow up on that, if like in the case of the exemptions, you were talking about a delay of 6 to 9 months, particularly, and as I understand it, is to get through that appeals process. With all the state permits that are still in place, are those those must be appealable? And is the timeline for the appeal, does that overlap with those 6 to 9 months, or is that separate from the 6 to 9 months?
Right, so yes, each state permit has its own appeal period, usually. So it's not that it's not that the appeal period for Act 250 is 6 to 9 months. It's that you, the developer, don't want to make the next large investment in your construction drawings until you have the Act 250 permit. So, I mean, you could, but you literally could spend $300,000-400,000 on construction drawings and get appealed, and then you're sitting there with another large risk in hand. So yes, each state permit has its own appeal period. I hate to even use these words, but I have never seen an appeal of one of our state water, wastewater, or stormwater permits. Possible.
Yeah, but the 6 to 9 months that you were referring to, that's separate from the appeals process or the appeals time period for the state permits? Or is that?
When you've applied for Act 250, you have also already started the application process for the state permits. You do those simultaneously.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And then separate topic, slightly separate topic. I'm thinking about the transition between potential exemptions and the long-term status quo once we arrive there. And do you think it feels like the exemption process relative to the long-term status, is that apples and oranges? Does it feel like an on-ramp, or does it feel like does that transition feel like the clawing back of freedoms, let's say?
That's a very good question. And I actually talked to Charlie Baker yesterday afternoon, and I think it is important that the exemption of the on-ramp, or whatever you want to call it, this transition period, should line up with the long-term exemption. You don't want to have an interim exemption that's larger that then gets shrunk with the long-term fix. So I think it is important to have congruency there.
So you do you feel like as it's written, it does that, or does it need to be tweaked to feel more like an on-ramp?
Yeah, I think it needs to be tweaked, I'm not, yeah.
Okay, okay, well, that's just, it's good to know, thank you. And if you have suggestions about that, open to ideas.
Oh, not right this morning, but
It's okay.
Yeah.
This is not really a question for you. I suppose I should be asking council, but, maybe you know the answer because of your years of work. When your Act 250 permit issues, how long is it, sort of open to appeal? Is that an appeal window shut within a certain number of days of issuance?
Yep, 30 days.
30 days, okay. So it's not so much the 30 days versus 15 days, it's just that you could be subject to an appeal, so.
Yeah.
Right, so what if it's, but okay, help me think this through. If it's a 30-day window, how does it end up at that point adding, 6 to 9 months from?
So for example, a lot of our projects qualify as priority housing projects, right? So they are exempt from Act 250. That means we still have to go get our state permits. But state permits are quite frankly technical permits, right?
Right,
So we then know, like, we've got the local permit, we're vested, and we can just move much faster to the construction, to getting to a construction closing. We don't have this kind of, sitting in never land. Oh, we don't know. We don't know if we're gonna get the Act 250 permit. We don't know if we're gonna get appealed. So we literally sit on our hands and try not to spend money until we get appeal free. It's such an important concept in real estate development. You could choose to spend a ton of money and not, like, oh, I'm not worried about it, but most developers don't. I think Zeke Davison's gonna talk after me, and he probably will have similar reflections.
sure, okay, and so the Putney project's old enough, I mean, the JO that we're requiring currently under the Act 100 PHP provisions said, get a JO to demonstrate that at the moment you started your project, you were in a period where you were not required to have an Act 250 permit, so it's documenting an exemption, really. I suppose even that JO could be appealed. Once there's a JO appeal, can you remind us of, is it automatically going to Environmental Division of Superior Court?
Yeah.
And have you had permits that have gone there? And can you say a little bit about the timing once of that experience?
Our experience in environmental court is, well, in Putney, the local permit was appealed. It took a year to get to a decision in environmental court, and then we appealed to the Supreme Court. But I would say our experience in environmental court is that it would be usually more like 18 months to get to a decision, particularly if you have to go to trial. And I agree, it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
But when it does happen, we could be opening the doors to 25 homes in Putney now.
Well, I don't often speak on behalf of the committee, but I'm pretty sure of this one. We all wish that you already were able to open the door to those 25 homes. So thank you for that. If the appeals went, for instance, to the Natural Resources Board, and the board had someone who is sort of like a housing appeals officer, so there could be much more timely review and adjudication. Does that sound like an attractive option to you as opposed to the current pathway through Environmental Division of Superior?
It does to me.
Yeah, okay, I know that's a leading question. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to do that. Any other questions from Ms. Byer?
I can see why anyone trying to do a development would not like the possibility of an appeal. You are where you are, you know where you're trying to get to, and the possibility of an appeal gets in the way. It's an impediment. So acknowledging that do you see any value in the appeals process? Does the person who is appealing have any legitimate interest in appealing? First question, and then secondly, is society well served? Is Vermont well served by the fact that there is a right of appeal?
That's a very large question, Senator. We've defined who can appeal in the party status definitions, right? That's the law. And I don't think I'm qualified to say, you know, is that a worthy appeal or not? That is the structure we have. Unfortunately, with affordable housing, I think it's there is a NIMBYism. There is a we don't want these people living in our community lens that happens. But we have a law that says you have party status, and under party status, you have the right to appeal. So that's the paradigm we're in.
Okay,
These people, in that sense.
well, that's an assumption about the motives of the appellant.
No.
That's an assumption, we've heard that before, certain assumptions about the motives of people.
Yeah.
I think there may be it may not be that they don't want, quote, these people here, we don't want this kind of structure there.
Or
But
change.
again, I'm not gonna keep charging on this, I would make the point that, often in our discussions, someone will raise an issue where they're not really wrong, but perhaps nigh on it. That what the old story about the dervish story of the blind men confronting an elephant. You get particular, depending on your involvement in the issue, you see the issue that way.
Yeah.
So if you're a developer, the right of appeal is an impediment to something good you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I can see why one would feel that way.
Yeah.
I don't like being impeded either, but when I'm trying to do something. But then on the other hand, there may be someone who has a legitimate right or incorrectly thinks they have a legitimate right, would like to at least have their position considered.
So we're. Mr. Chair, we think we know what we're talking about here, and we use vocabulary words that suggest things other than what the words convey.
Like-
So you think you have a legitimate right means for the purpose of this discussion. What,
I mean, what I just said.
well, doesn't that generally mean that you are appealing the application of law? That the law is being misinterpreted? When you say you have a legitimate gripe and what is it you're appealing? You're appealing the lawfulness of what you believe is gonna take place?
That's one possible ground, there are many. That's one of many.
No, that's what you appeal, so the motive for doing that is. We can, you say you're only appealing the law because for your own personal prejudices. You're appealing the law. Is that not what you're appealing?
You're appealing the judgment of the board.
In application of the law.
Well, there are many, I'm not sure where you're going, Mark,
I'm not sure where we're going when we talk about, we're trying to stop appeals. Which is to say that you may have a lawful reason for your objection, but we're not gonna hear it. Is that what we're saying? It is too important to our goals to waste time appealing the law.
I guess for one thing, you seem to be directing your remarks to me.
Oh, no, I'm-
Where I'm going with this is that I think we are operating, the entire discussion seems to be standing on a principle that appeals are inherently a bad thing. And I am suggesting that they may or may not be. That's the point
Depending on,
depending on any number of things, including the law. Including the accuracy of the board's interpretation of the law, including the details of the proposal.
Chair Watson?
I have thoughts on this topic, but I also am sensitive to the fact that we probably have to go on. So, I'm
Right,
I'm gonna
well,
hold my thought, but I have
I did
comments
not
on
intend for
this
this to
very,
take this long, I
on
gotta
this
say.
very topic.
Yeah.
So let's put a pin in that, come back.
so as we go along, Mr. Chair. I don't know what a home is. I know what a dwelling is. I know what a single family dwelling is. But we keep using words that are undefined like homes. This is a home bill. And we don't use words that have standing in law as we are discussing how to craft law.
so I take your point there. You end up in an appeal because someone says the law was misinterpreted. And then we have an adjudicatory process to say, was the law interpreted properly or improperly? If you have a right under law, make an appeal. Then I think it's an entirely legitimate thing to do. The motives for making an appeal are what are coloring the conversation. Is it a legitimate concern or is it just, I don't want to see anything?
If appeals are weaponized to kill projects, that, which happens, that is, not appropriate. And because the appeals process is so long, like if you could appeal and get a decision the next day, right? Appeal all you want, cool, that's fine. But the risk reward of the current appeals process is such that it can kill projects. When the debate is over, do you have enough shrubbery, right? Like, if it took you a year to decide you don't have enough shrubbery, but really the project has died in the meantime, that is not a good use of the appeals process.
If I understand you correctly, I think you've just more or less said where I was trying to get to. Which is that there's, on the one hand, one might argue that appeals are a bad thing. On the other hand, one might argue that the way we do appeals allows for misuse.
I would agree
Okay.
that the way that we do appeals is broken.
If we wanna look there, and that's what I am willing and eager to go there, as opposed to an explanation of how we have to read fewer appeals. Appeals are a bad thing. How do we save Vermont from appeals? As opposed, because there, I think that's a bad path for us to go down. But on the other hand, the idea is the act, and I'm not sure it's true, but I'm aware that many people are of the opinion that the appeals process can be misused. And if that's the case, if there are people who think that, we should certainly explore that. And then if we come to the point where we agree with that, then we ought to figure out ways to make the appeals process less likely to be abused.
There is the whole other thing that I'm seeing in this story, like, so thank you, Ms. Byer, for helping us get to another layer of the conversation. So, but it sounds like the appeal, one of the unintended consequences, it's fine to robustly support a right to appeal and having a process. But if there's the unintended consequence of the process of going through the appeal becomes so burdensome to an applicant that even if they were going to win the appeal, the project itself is lost, then that seems problematic. Projects that will win on merit could be delayed long enough that they collapse. And that's not a good system for anybody. So I think you're helping us sharpen up our thinking and questions. So thank you.
That's a good discussion. Thank you.
Great. With that, gonna go to Mr. Davidson. Thanks for coming back. I think we saw you in maybe January in a joint meeting, which feels like a year ago right now.
It does.
And just to check, we can't see your video yet, but we can hear you loud and clear, so.
Great. Thank you, Senator Bray. I hope you'll suffer me without video today. I'm on the road, so I will stay off camera if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. Zeke Davison, Summit Properties. We're the largest private developer of affordable and mixed income housing in the state. Obviously, I always appreciate in this testimony going after Kathy. It makes my job a lot easier, and she is obviously a wealth of knowledge on the world we operate in, and she is a good act to follow, though tough one. I have a specific project that I want to use as sort of illustrative of some of the conversations we're having here, and it's one I brought before you all last year as you were talking about, I don't remember the name, it was the Homes Act last year, and how the narrow exemption you guys created there really did benefit a project. But first I wanted to just follow up on the conversation and hit a couple thematic points of what you all just were discussing. And I wanted first sort of hedge and just say, I'm talking about all of this in the context of the tier 1 designated area exemption of Act 250 conversation. I'm not, these conversations may or may not be relevant to the tier 2 and 3 areas that you're all discussing, but specifically to the tier 1. As Kathy said, I think the number one concern of all developers is the amount of money invested in pre-development to get so far down the line and have the risk of appeal at the very end of Act 250. And when Act 250 was created, that individual right of appeal was really, my understanding, created because Act 250 was a way that the state could step in and make sure that local and regional development happened in a way that was within the interest of the community. And these were communities that did not have zoning bylaws, did not have DRBs, did not have zoning administrators, had no local way for people to be input. And so the desire was to have a really democratic process. This is how people can have their voice heard. What we're talking about here in the designated area, the tier 1 areas, are towns with professional zoning boards, with modern bylaws, and the democratic process that is required to get into that. There are really right now in our zoning regime, in our permitting regime, 3 or 4 democratic processes, which didn't exist in the 70s when Act 250 was created. The first is the code writing, right? Every town, in everything that supports developers in doing good development, it's how do we create objectivity? How do we create certainty in the zoning process so that developers can design projects, can design neighborhoods consistent with what the community wants? And that first step is the code writing. I believe that these tier 1 designated areas are going to need to prove modern, democratically written zoning code. That's the first place that anybody that has a genuine interest in the community and how their community is built out can have their voice heard. The second is, once a project is brought forward, the discussion with the DRB or the zoning administrator on whether the project as proposed lives up to the standards of that code. And that is I'll get into my project here in a second, but that is a really democratic process. That is an open meeting, 2, 3, 4 DRB meeting process where anybody who has a concern can come and be heard. And then the DRB decisions, the town municipal permit decisions are always appealable and get appealed. Then we enter the state.
Can I ask a quick question on that one?
Sure.
How long is the sort of window of vulnerability on appeal of a DRB decision? Is it resolved in a timely way?
No, it would. I mean, the appeal periods are generally 30 days. But then if it ends up in environmental court, I mean, we're talking about the same judicial delays that have plagued all appellant rights.
Okay.
But
your question, appeal of a local decision by a DRB can you just remind the committee, please, or at least me, of how that appeal is, what the process is for that appeal? Does it stay local before it might go to the environmental division, or do you go right to the environmental division?
I am fortunate that I have never been through that process, so I don't want to misspeak on it. My
Okay.
understanding is it goes right to the environmental court, but if Kathy or anybody on can correct me on that, I would love that.
Okay, great. We'll chase that down. Thanks. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
No, that's okay. So then you start to get the state permits, as Kathy said. Those are generally technical permits. They are not appealed because they are purely technical. Are you building to design specs? Are you following, state engineering laws, that type of thing? That is the stage where for zoning, for development in a designated area in a town that has professional bylaws, a professional staff, has determined what it wants growth to look like. The development is ready to go. All voices have been heard. It has been, you've reviewed the objective criteria, you've reviewed the subjective criteria. That is typically the point at which a developer would feel confident spending the next, as Kathy said, several $100,000 moving forward with the project. What happens with Act 250 is you then enter, as Kathy said, you start the 6 to 9 month process of the Act 250 permit. It is hundreds, I think the max is $180,000 in permit application, which is not refundable. And then the most, the horror story, as you all say, and her Putney project represents this, is that at the very end of all of that, for a lot of projects, the democratic process begins. And that is just so antithetical to what developers need in spending the money to get to the point of being able to have a project that is going to be able to make a real impact on the housing market. So I know that we talk often about the horror stories as boogeymen, and we can say yes, but the approval rating is so high. What ends up happening is that for us, for Kathy and I, for other developers around the state, it just has such a chilling effect that effectively what happens is developers are really scared and loath to even begin a process that is not in an area that is going to be exempt from Act 250. If it is a project that is going to take a lot of pre-development, if it's a project that isn't just 9 units at a time. So I think it is we can't really quantify, other than to look at our entire housing stock and say it's woefully insufficient. We can't really look at any figure or number and say the appeal rate is so low and the permit approval rate is so high, and use that as evidence that Act 250 doesn't have a big impact. I think we need to understand that it is a chilling impact. I mean, the first thing we do when somebody says, I think we have a great parcel, the town wants growth here, we say, is it going to be subject to Act 250? And if it is, we will often just categorically say, no, thank you. And a lot of that is because of that risk of appeal at the very end, and the risk of putting $500,000 worth of pre-development expenses just to get that is not there. So that is trying to address a couple of the themes you guys have already touched on. I'll bring our project that we're doing right now as sort of a case study for you all. So I came before you last year. We are proposing a 200 unit, mixed income, smart growth, energy efficient, new neighborhood in the town of Middlebury. When I came in front of you on the Homes Act last year, the town of Middlebury had just secured a neighborhood development area designation in order to unlock a lot of the opportunity. I mean, this was a huge priority from employers, from the town, from the select board. The planning commission was to be able to get this neighborhood designation. One of the advantages of which, as the town acknowledged, was going to be development exemption from Act 250. We were approached by Middlebury College about how we could help them alleviate their workforce housing shortages. And I can say, if the town hadn't been working to get that NDA, we would not have been interested in trying to go down that road of pursuing that project. The Homes Act last year, as it came out of your committee, again, priority housing project, it extended the exemption to towns like Middlebury that are under 10,000 people, and the outcome is that project is going to be exempt from Act 250. In the interim, we've gone to sketch plan. So we did 3 meetings at sketch with the DRB. We got our preliminary plat approval. That was another 3 meetings. So 6 meetings in total with the DRB just to get to this phase. And the purpose of the tiered on a large project, there's a lot of pre-development expenses. So the purpose of a PUD, a 3-tiered local permitting process is to every step we get more confidence in investing more in the pre-development expenses. So where we are right now is we are preparing all of our drawings, all of our engineering for our final plat approval, which we're hoping to submit in the next few months. When we get final plat, we can move right to state permitting and right to construction close and breaking ground, hopefully later this year. If we were subject to Act 250, we would be looking, summer of 2025, and biting our nails at the risk of appeal, despite the fact that we've had, we're following a zoning bylaw that was just recently written and passed, and 6 DRB meetings to get even just to the preliminary plat stage. So the impact here, our exemption here from Act 250, because of what your committee and the legislature did last year, gave us the confidence first to move forward with the project, which we might not have otherwise done. And second, has us on the precipice of breaking ground and trying to start construction on up to 200 new homes, the first 2 phases of which are all going to be for sale homes, workforce housing, and hopefully a low-income housing tax credit project that the town desperately needs. I think that what the committee here with the Tier 1 designation has the opportunity to do is write that story in a lot of other communities around the state that want to do meaningful development, that want to support their workforce, that want to support the employers in town, and are saying this is the type of development we want, and we're ready to approve it ourselves. So that is my case study. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think the importance of providing the type of exemption for Tier 1 areas, for designated areas, much like the benefit we had in Middlebury with the NDA, is really crucial if we're going to do the smart development in our town centers and try to prevent sprawl.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and I don't often speak parochially, but I'd say in the case of that project and last year's bill, that I was very intent on making sure that worked out, because it merited inclusion in the exemptions that we came up with. So as you said, a lot of work was done, appropriately placed, et cetera, et cetera. So it all go on, but I'm glad to hear that work has been helpful to moving that project forward. And you've had all that local input, so it's clearly not unreviewed by the public. One quick question before we go to Senator Watson. Can you just give us a range for Summit? What's the range of project size that you'll take on, small to large?
Sure. Our bread and butter is working like Kathy's in the low-income housing tax credit world, and there's sort of a 25 to 50 unit sweet spot for that type of multifamily building development. So a lot of the developments we've done have been in that range. We just opened 94 units in South Burlington, 2 separate buildings. That's a mixed income community. 71 of those are restricted to people that make less than 60% of area median income. We just welcomed 20 families coming out of coordinated entry straight from homelessness into those communities. The Middlebury project represents an opportunity coming out of our ARPA funded world where we have a large award from VHFA to do workforce housing for sale homes. So that allows us to do there's more projects, there's more subsidy and programs, and I think you'll hear from Maura and Gus later. They've been really creative in creating the types of programs that allow us to build neighborhoods now. And we can layer phases with different programs that the states that their two agencies are working hard. So this project of 200 units represents a couple tailwinds. One, a really motivated employers in Middlebury College and Porter Hospital. Two, a town that really, a town administration that really wants this development. And three, the ARPA era investment in housing with Gus and Maura that are allowing us to be able to finance these types of projects despite construction costs. So that was a really long way, Senator Bray, of saying a typical one-off project is going to be in the 25 to 50 unit range.
Yeah.
These types of opportunities are unique to today, and we're grateful for.
Sure, great. Well, thank you. The new neighborhood you're creating in Middlebury is right across the street from someone else's new neighborhood from, I don't know, the 60s or 70s.
And quite frankly, there just aren't new neighborhood developments outside of Chittenden County in the state because of the economics of it. And it's taken a lot of things to make this project a reality, including the Act 250 exemption. And everybody plays a part in every committee in the State House, and every developer plays a part in trying to tackle the housing crisis.
Great. Senator Watson.
Thank you. One of the things that I feel like I've heard really clearly from you that I think, I guess I didn't put it in these terms previously, but that I appreciate is that the democratic process, AKA the appeals process, mostly happens at the end after all this investment has happened. And so you're making this huge investment and then it's kind of at risk through the democratic process, which is, we should have that process. One of the things that I also feel like I heard you say is that towards the beginning with the development review boards that the project would go through in the local process. There's also a democratic process in there. And so I just want to highlight that it sounds like there are really two, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to make sure that I have this correct, that for places that have development review boards, there are two democratic processes, one towards the beginning and one at the very end. Is that accurate?
I would say in a place that has a development review board, there are three democratic processes that are sort of a broad to specific funnel, right? The first is participating in public meetings and then voting on zoning bylaws. The second is going to DRB hearings and making public comment on a specific proposed project. And the third is at the DRB stage, if the project is approved by the DRB, appealing it there. So that's the sort of democratic process that's essential to a DRB permit approval.
Okay, that's fair. And I guess I'm thinking so that's fair, right, relative to the question I asked in terms of like the democratic process. And I guess maybe I was referring mostly just to the part of like where along the path can a member of the public step in to say, I object to this. And that's because that's fair. I shouldn't minimize the democratic process to just that, because there is voting on the bylaws, there is the opportunity for comment, etc. So, and one other further question on that, and this is, I'm like having been in local politics, I feel like I should have this more closely at my fingertips than I do right now, but I'm trying to remember, and it probably is different from town to town, but I'm trying to think of like what the difference is in who has rights to appeal a DRB process versus who has rights to appeal an Act 250 process. I think I know the answer to that, at least in terms of in referencing my experience in Montpelier, but from your perspective, is there a difference in who has the right to appeal? I think there is, but from your perspective, is there a difference in who has the right to appeal in those two appeal opportunities?
That's a good question. certainly I think we're all pretty familiar with the party status provision in Act 250 definition. I'm less actually familiar, specifically in Middlebury where we're proposing this project now. I think if there's a motivated group, an appeal there will be a way to appeal. But you're right, I don't know exactly the statutory difference in the definition of who can appeal between those two.
That's okay. I mean, my recollection, and I'm very willing to be wrong if anyone has any different information, but I think in order to appeal a DRB opinion, you have to have participated in the process. And so I think that is broader than, let's say, a group of 10, or it has been a group of 10, or potentially in a butter. So I actually might propose or put forward this idea that the DRB process is open and available to more people than to whom it is available in the Act 250 process.
Yep.
Okay.
Just positing.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Davidson. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, thank you all.
Good luck down in Middlebury. I look forward to one day maybe going to like a ribbon cutting or something where people finally start moving into dwellings.
Hopefully soon. We will certainly put you on the invite and dignitary list, Senator Bray. We appreciate all the support of the
I don't know about dignitary list, but I'm sure. All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
That will go to Ms. Collins. Good to see you again. Probably been most of a year.
Good morning. Good to see you all. I am here as Maura Collins, Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I know what I'd like to cover in my brief time. I hope it's what you all wanted me to cover. There wasn't a lot of direction here, but I will say that what I hope to talk about is I heard most of the testimony from yesterday. I know there were some questions about data and numbers. I know VHFA is often looked to as having some answers in that regard. I'm not prepared to go through S311 and give you
Perfect, because we're
particular edits.
higher level first.
Yep.
And starting to get into the weeds a little as we learn. But
So you've heard from two experts who can talk about those experiences of developers. I want to say that S311, along with several other bills moving through the State House, are all largely good bills that are going to help us address the housing needs. And what I want to leave you with at the end of my time is a message of we do need to address the housing issues that we have today, and the ways that this bill and other bills can increase density and make timing more predictable will make housing more affordable. And I'm going to show you that with numbers.
is that the old high school in Burlington, a block away from the campus? No, sorry.
No, sorry.
It's a big lake and
Oh, no, this is the Big Lake. That is in the new north end of Burlington, of the King Green Rise development.
orphanage.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now called Liberty House. And so there's affordable housing, there's family affordable housing there, as well as age specific housing, and hopefully some affordable homeownership units to come, as well as market rate rentals, homeownership, and a real example of what can be done through master planning. And I just want to underscore something Zeke said a minute ago about the democratic process and actually approving the plans.
I've been corrected.
The public
process.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The public process, because I do think that there are residents who go into those town bylaws and zoning conversations and all that, knowing when there's going to be a big redevelopment, and actually weigh in with that in mind. But what I want to talk about, there was a question yesterday, I believe, about the Department of Housing was talking about the immediate need of how many units, how many housing units we need today, and trying to grapple, well, how does that compare to what VHFA said last year? We need 30 to 40,000 units. The green box in the middle of this very busy slide addresses what the estimate was that we put out last year, which is that to meet a healthy vacancy rate, to have homes for all the people who are not counted as having homes right now, which is homeless folks. And if we were just gonna go back to pre-pandemic Vermont growth rate, ignore the influx we've had recently, pre-pandemic, we'd need 30,000 more housing units available to folks between now and 2030. Someone said 10 years, it's not even 10 years, it's 2024 then. So that would mean about 6,700 homes a year. Now, rest assured, they don't all have to be new construction. We can take underutilized homes and reuse them. We could, if y'all want to get big and bold, we could have some big changes in state policy and start incentivizing second homes to be used as primary residences. And that would mean we could start having those homes available to Vermonters, not to the tourists who drive our economy. So there's a debate there, but we could have those available. You don't have to build 6,700. And if we don't make those big shifts, we do have to build 6,700 if we're not going to do things to reutilize these spaces. As Commissioner Farrell spoke to last year, yesterday, that, you know, in the 80s, it was actually a dropping off of what was happening in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but at that point, we were permitting about 3,800 homes a year. Since 2010, we've been permitting about 1,700, almost 1,800 homes a year. So we've dropped by about half. My crude drawing shows that if we were to have to permit for what we need, just to get to a healthy vacancy rate and address homelessness and meet the modest growth we expect in the state, we have to go far, far above that and get up to 6,700 homes a year. Any data nerd would point out that actually this is all permits, and not all these permits create homes. A lot of these permits die in the vine for lots of reasons, not just appeals, but, you know, financing constraints, changes in market, things like that. But I was using permits as a proxy for the kind of homes we have to add.
Do you have a sense of the relationship? Thanks for pointing out that it's a proxy. Do you have a sense of the relationship, like about how tight a correlation there is, like 80% of those actually become homes someday?
Yeah, I did know that at one point, and it's not in my brain in this moment, but it is a pretty steady thing, and I couldn't say.
Okay.
As you can see, there's a difference between single family and multifamily. We are seeing more multifamily permits happening than we did historically, and that is a great thing for density. So that's what I want to talk about next, is that if we need homes, just to address the homeless issues and to meet that pre-pandemic growth, then we have to look at density. One thing I wanted to point out, a lot of people say, well, VHFA says we need 30 to 40,000 homes by 2030, and they think maybe we're just bad at math because we couldn't pick a number between the two. The difference between 30 and 40 was not bad at math. It was when we were doing that math, actually in late 2022, we didn't know what the growth rate of Vermont would be. We still don't. But 30,000 units is what we need if we assume pre-2019 growth rates, which is why I say pre-pandemic, the good old fashioned what we were doing for 2009 to 2019, chugging along. The 40,000 units would be if the pandemic growth rate were to sustain until 2030. I think there's evidence to show it's not going to be what it was when it was at its highest point. I also am seeing evidence that it's also going to be more than what we saw pre-pandemic. So it's somewhere in the middle there. I went with the low estimate on my stat there. So if we're going to need to add housing, it needs to be dense, not just because that's the right thing for the environment. It also is more affordable. It is what consumers are demanding. It's what people want to see. They want to be in walkable communities. Our elders, as more of the proportion of our state is older, they are driving less, they want to be in downtown areas. There are so many reasons why we want density. Yet, as you can see from this national graphic, Vermont has the largest lot size in the nation. The national average is just over 15,000 square feet. Ours is over 78,000 square feet.
She's approaching 2 acres.
So the national average has not changed since the year I was born. It has largely been about the same. I don't have historical information about Vermont's, but knowing land use that I do, I don't think there's been recent shifts in this regard. You can see we are joined by other northern New England states, although they are less than half of our lot size and their population is twice ours.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So if there's a house on the edge of town, whatever, and it's on 120 acres, does that 120 get rolled in and suck up the average for the average lot size in Bristol?
Yes, and this was based on a sample. This is not census data. This was a private firm that did this analysis, and they looked at 400,000 lots across the country, and so it's a sampling in that regard.
And I'm just wondering what if you sample lot size in Bristol Village or New North End, we might look much less like an ounce.
Yes, the sampling that they did was based on recent transactions. And so it would be skewed toward, were we seeing more activity of for sale listings in our downtowns or not? And because there's more properties within downtown areas that may have smaller sizes, in some ways it might even skew too small if we had a universe. On top of needing density, and that hopefully being an underlying point of S311 and other bills you look at, we have to move fast. This graphic will shows you how the housing payments, just the mortgage payment, not counting taxes, not counting insurance, how rising interest rates can affect affordability. And so a home that was affordable, especially to a first-time home buyer or to a renter trying to move into homeownership, by waiting and having interest rates go up, it hurts affordability. Now, some of us watch the decisions of Jerome Powell very closely, and there was not interest rate movement this week, and there is some expectation that interest rates will go down by the end of this year. And yet I was just with New Hampshire state economists yesterday, and from all the economists I'm hearing from, I'm not hearing general consensus that rates will go below 6% this year. I would say is conventional wisdom. So they are going to remain high, even if they drop somewhat, because they are well into the sixes, 6.5 and higher.
Okay, so I don't want to be perverse, but if they're gonna be dropping, I'm not quite sure I get the we need to go fast conclusion.
Because as we can see what happened over the last 2 years, and I'm gonna have 2 slides from now, is gonna point out that over the last 2 years, not moving 2 years ago means that we ruled out a lot of affordable housing.
Right.
And so I'm not gonna predict that rates are about to go 2 percentage points higher in the next 2 years.
Right.
But that we have lost out on a lot because of the way interest rates have moved, and if interest rates stay high, housing cost pressures are going to stay high, and so that's why, again, we need the density and we need the predictability, so that the developers you heard from will take the risks and know that the market is there, because a bigger number of people can afford the homes they're creating.
I'm just relatable, we wish we had moved faster.
Mhm.
No, I get it, who knows where it'll go, Senator McKenna, just.
Waiting. Of rates. During the COVID, when the interest rates were virtually nothing, I'm using a proper number. We had a sweeping purchase of single family dwellings taking place by people who knew that they could collect in rent immediately the cost of their monthly payments for mortgages. And this makes, owning a house more expensive. Meanwhile, the last situation we were in made buying houses and renting them much more attractive. And those houses are no longer owned by the people that live there. They're dwellings but not homes. We get these 4 or 5 different moving parts, and we pick the part we wish to present to this process to achieve what the people that send, the different interest groups want, and we use statistics that are both good and bad at the same time. It just goes on.
I can appreciate that complexity. In fact, when Gus from VHCB and I spoke to all the members on December 1st, Senate and House, my presentation was about the complexity of the housing market. And that for anyone, I had 10 list of causes of the housing crisis that we're facing. And it went from short-term rentals to rising interest rates, but also to increased cost to build, influx of out-of-state movers, NIMBYism, Act 250, higher interest rates, lower household sizes. There were a whole bunch of ideas. And each slide after, I had a stat and a chart to show if this is your issue du jour that you care about, if you're gonna blame it all on short-term rentals, I got data to prove that you're right. The bad news is that if you hate Act 250, there's not data to prove you're right, but there's that spaghetti chart of complexity that people pull out to try to make a case that they're right. And when people want to look at the local NIMBYism and say that it's the municipal permitting is all bad and wrong, there's a ton of cases at the Supreme Court that they can point to. You are right that people can pick it by giving that full exposure. I was trying to say that there are a lot of things that are holding back the housing market right now. You asked me to come in and talk about S311, which is about housing creation and what can be done. And that really focuses on timing and density as the issues. If we were here talking about the renewable energy standard or the clean heat standard or something like that, I would be talking about housing in light of the ongoing operational costs and how that can drive up the cost of housing. So I think it's not so much picking the data, but instead catering it to the bill and the message. But I think that your point about people buying up homes and then renting them out and investor-owned ownership is very concerning. And if someone wants to put out a bill,
And what focused in a particular period of time.
yes,
So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, the witness has said in fewer words a shorter time, which I would try to convey, so that. But however, witnesses, a variety of witnesses will come in and pick on one of those things to the exclusion of the others. And try and sell us on the wisdom of that particular thing, and we are. And we often bite the hook.
Well, so I appreciate you sort of opening the lens back up again and sort of Ms. Collins, point, we did ask her to close the lens down and come in on 311. So you're both right. Once again, we're in violent agreement in the room. And we should proceed.
so
Yeah, violent agreement.
that is one reason why I like.
Unfortunately, we understand what that means.
I do like S311 because it does marry a lot of these issues we're talking about today, which is timing and predictability and density, along with, it mentions a lot of housing investments, which are also important, that run the gamut from eviction prevention and all the way through home ownership, which are all necessary. I wanted to point to, this is national data, this is the one that's not Vermont based, but the orangey red bars that you see show how prices of some key construction materials changed between February of 2017 and February of 2020. And then you can see how much those same products changed between February 2020 and February 2023. And so this goes to show that this is pointing to the material shortages and cost increases and impact of inflation. If I had more time, I could also show a labor market chart here about how also there's labor force delays and how it takes longer and longer to find qualified workers to do to work with these products and do what's needed. All that is driving up the cost of housing, which is what I have here on my last slide, which is 2 years, which is what we see when there are long-standing appeals process or drawn out approvals. We can see 2-year delays, and this table shows how where the median home price, for sale home price, was in early 2021 compared to where it was in early 2023. And you can see that not only did the median home price go up, but interest rates went up, and therefore monthly mortgage payments went up. And in 2021, academically speaking, we would have had just under 25,000 renters who could have theoretically afforded the median price home at the going interest rate. And 2 years later, because of the higher home price and higher interest rate, that's down to under 5,000 renters. So going back to a goal, I believe, of this committee, which is what's the balance of new construction and versus reusing properties in a really environmental way. What I'm pointing out here is that there are 20,000 renters in Vermont who are now stuck in the rental market that could have become homeowners and could have made that shift, but now cannot afford that. And that's 20,000 apartments that otherwise could have gotten a voucher and served people without homes, could have really addressed that housing need. The picture at the bottom is a project I was prepared to speak about, but you already heard Kathy. This is the rendering of the Putney project that, as you've heard, has been held up for 2 years, despite 2 years before that going through an extensive planning process and envisioning of that. And so time is money. And so predictability and clarity has a dollar value to it. Now, I can't speak, and I heard a lot of questions about data that I didn't talk to today. I can't speak to the universality of that cost. I can't tell you that on average, Vermont loses X number of dollars because of delays. And there's no master database of housing developments that could have had a few more units. No one's collecting data on things that don't come in the door, as Commissioner Farrell said to you yesterday. So, but I can speak to what has happened in the last 2 years, and that should that continue for the next 2 years, there will be costs and there will be housing impacts as a result.
Is there a version of this chart, or do you ever look at, so we have PITI on line 3. Do we ever add energy costs? And I ask, this is an energy committee, and under PHPs, we require building to the stretch code, the idea, moderate front end investment, long-term savings to homeowners or renters. And
I don't know of any data on the ownership.
The math come through to help us make sure that we're not engaging in any kind of wishful thinking.
I don't know of data on the ownership side. On the rental side, we do have utility assistance charts that HUD puts out and the like, and we do have a database of about 9,000 units of tax credit housing where we know how much people are spending on utilities, but those are multifamily, well-built already, Energy Star properties. As for homeowners, we know what their heating type is, as you know, but average cost today, I can't think of it. I'd have to talk to my PSD and PUC friends to see if they got it.
Okay, well, thanks. I know we've partnered over the years on weatherization and all sorts of things, trying to make that investment for pocketbook reasons as well as environmental. Thank you, Senator Watson.
Just for anybody in the room who might know, how many units was the Putney project?
25.
And then one of the concerns that came up for me anyway, in going through 311,
is with the loss of definition of PHPs, the requirement for stretch code goes away. Do you see any path for ensuring that projects like the Putney project or what would be PHPs in the absence of that definition would be built to stretch code?
I'm gonna answer that in two ways. For one, to the extent that priority housing projects, PHPs, receive public dollars, then VHCD and VHFA have design standards that do get there. There is a way to be a PHP without getting our resources though, so that wouldn't apply in that situation. I am glad that you teed up the very last thing. I said I wasn't gonna go into specifics about the bill and edits to it, but I did want to flag that the loss of incentivizing and encouraging mixed income housing is important to consider. I know that people think PHPs is a proxy for affordable housing, but it's actually a proxy for mixed income housing, and it's ensuring that affordable units are mixed in with what would otherwise happen. And so VHCB and VHFA have talked about, and in other bills have suggested that if PHPs are going away, that there should be some kind of study and look at what a successor program could look like, so that we have the kind of mixed income, healthy communities that have been built ever since we created PHPs back in the day. So we would like to see that be considered. We're not gonna figure out all those nuances and details of what that replacement is in the moment. But I heard testimony from Charlie Baker yesterday saying that PHP should at least stay on the books in the meantime, so that a municipality that doesn't hit tier whatever would still have that option. And I would reinforce that message that keeping something out there, as well as thinking about what that successor program looks like, would be important to make sure that we keep our communities vital.
We're starting to get a call. I don't know if you have one slide or two.
No, I'm done.
Oh, you're done.
That's amazing.
Also perfect, perfect timing. Thanks as always for coming in. You always have plenty of information. I'm guessing we'll have more questions and as we get into details. But thanks for teeing up a bigger picture. One of the things I'll ask us to come back to, and maybe you'll be the one to help us on, what do we mean by mixed income? And then just a little bit about like why mixed income, mixed use housing is a desirable thing for us to do, like, so that we're.
I have data on that, so.
Great, all right. I noticed over the years, you always have data and good data. So with that, I apologize to folks who we originally had on the schedule. At the end of the day yesterday, our floor schedule got moved. So we're having to reschedule, and we also, when someone's here, we need to cut them off and move on, which means another trip back to Montpelier. So, Mr. Sidley, my apologies, who's on and